Hope you're not going to mute me.
All right, so we are live. Hey, everyone. This is Warren. We are starting the PSPowerHour. We're going to have a bunch of community lightning talks. I don't want to take up too much time, so we're going to kick it off to Fred.
Hi, everybody. Hope you have a great day, whatever time of day it is for you. One of my favorite topics in PowerShell is run spaces. Run spaces are awesome when it comes to parallelizing PowerShell. Problem is that once you start a run space, getting information from the run space before it ends tends to be kind of messy. We deal with synchronized hash tables, synchronized list, whatever. So I've got a module called the PS framework. Some people might have already been ambushed by me when I tried to brag about my latest toys. And the PS framework has a few tools in order to make this easier to hand over information from one running run space to another run space. There are two kinds of information really in PowerShell, in my opinion. One of them is messages, like progress information, like write variables, write warning, whatever you write, and output objects. So let's take a look at it. We've got tools for both. For one thing, we've got a message system that handles messages. The thing is, you can write them from any run space and access them from anywhere else. So let's start a new job. Thank you, Boprox, for your awesome module. Started a run space, and now the only thing it really did was access the message, but it was written from another run space, and we've got access to it from anywhere. Now, this is nice for tracking what happens in another run space. However, what if you want to exchange objects from in between run spaces? This can also be done, and there's a commandlet for this. Dynamic content object. Let's create a dynamic content object named foo. It needs a name. The name must be unique. And let's make it a queue. So anybody can enqueue and anybody can dequeue objects from it. Need to specify the password parameter. So we can now enqueue a value. We can dequeue it. So let's see how that works in a run space scenario. Now I'm just going to, we need to access the dynamic content object. We just reference it again with the same name. And now we enqueue in another run space. Just a little bit of random string just to show the principle. And then we start sleep it for a random amount in order to mess up the order in which the objects turn up. Jobs are started, and now we can start dequeuing objects. They turn up in any arbitrary random order, some different processing time. And all of this is completely run space safe. So you could now create additional run spaces that process the input objects. And this allows us to freely create worker run spaces that generate data and worker run spaces that process data without each other getting in the way and without having to deal with all the detailed object scheduling, synchronization, passing through variables into other run spaces, things like that. It's been a bother, and I did not like being bothered. Way too lazy to deal with this every single time. And that's pretty much it. Simple way to exchange data between run spaces. Thank you.
Cool. Alrighty. So up next we have Tom.
Hello, everyone. Let me just start sharing. So my name is Tom Inge, and one of my babies lately has been documentation. So I'm gonna do a quick talk about that. And for the demo today, I have some code, but what I'm going to show applies to more or less any documentation, not only code documentation. So in this repository, we have some source code, which is irrelevant in this case, and we also have a docs folder. And one of the cool ways to automate documentation that I found is writing the documentation in Markdown, which is a markup language that allows you to write anything as text, and you can convert it to pretty much anything. So for technical documentation, it's really great, and also for code documentation with PowerShell because of tools like Platypus, which enables you to create pre-formatted documentation of your based on your code. And another cool thing about Platypus is that it will also, based on the Markdown you create the external help XML files for you as well, based on the Markdown. But that's a digression, I guess. It can be converted pretty much anything. So even VS Code has a parser for Markdown. So no matter how you write it, you can always take a look at how the parsing will look in any converted form. And so you can convert it pretty much anything. For documentation of code or any other IT system. An HTML document is often the case that you want to convert it to, and probably the most used tool for that is called mkdocs, which will convert Markdown to static HTML files. It works by having a configuration YAML file somewhere in your repo, and then you can just run mkdocs build, and it will generate a complete static HTML site for you based on your Markdown documentation. So there are, of course, an HTML site isn't much worth just on your local machine. So there are several services that let you host mkdocs content. Probably one of the biggest one is readthedocs.io. The problem with those is that for open source or free project, if you don't pay for the product, you often have to be okay with ads on your site. But also customers aren't always that happy about hosting their documentation on some external site. So what I'm going to show now is a way to host it that uses sort of a hidden gem in Azure storage accounts, which is something called static HTML hosting. This is something that you enable on your storage account. So of course you need to connect your Azure account. You need to know what kind of resource group you want to put it in. But then you create your storage account like this. I've already made it, so it will fail. But you do a new AZ storage account on your resource group and give it a name and some location, some SKU name, and you need to make it a storage v2 kind of storage account. If you don't use the kind parameter, it will create a v1 storage account, and that's not usable for the static website hosting. So if you have a suitable storage account, or like in my case, I've already made it, you need to just load it into our rival. So use get AC storage account, and that's because we need the context of the storage account to be able to run the remaining commands. So after we've either found a suitable storage account to host it on or created a new one, we need to enable the static storage static website on the storage account. And that's with the enable AC storage static website command. You give it the storage account context, and then you have to tell it the default index page and the default 404 page. So by doing this, Azure will create a container on your storage account, a blob container that it calls $web. And in the $web container, any static HTML or image file that you upload will be hosted by Azure automatically. And this is also at no extra cost, so you only pay for the actual storage. So after you've enabled the storage static website functionality on the storage account, you can then take the generated site from mkdocs and upload the static HTML. So let's just do that quick. So a blob in Azure is just a file. So we need to iterate through all the files and upload them. And also there's really not, at least in the backend, the concept of folders in storage blobs. So we need to do some magic on the name to make the folder structure persist. So after you run this, it will upload. It should upload the entire site. Okay, so for whatever reason it's stuck. There we go. So now it uploads all the files to the storage account. And I probably start it all over again. So now you can get the URL for your site by checking the primary endpoints on the storage account. And now it should be hosted on this URL. So if I can do some new screen sharing. We have the finished HTML code hosted in Azure.
About a 2-minute mark.
Okay, so of course this isn't automated, so you could automate it as well. This is only code. What you could do is let me find it. There we go. Is Azure DevOps or Azure DevOps pipeline. So here I've created an Azure DevOps pipeline on the repo. So every time you commit it, it's enabled for continuous integration. So this build pipeline is run every time you commit to the repo. Then it installs mkdocs on the run on the agent and builds the site, and then uses just a Azure file copy task to upload the entirety of this build to the same site. So yeah, that was me. Thanks for listening.
Awesome. Thanks, Tom. So next up, we have Jakob.
Okay, hi. So what I will be showing today is one approach to test self-contained scripts with Pester. And so for me, well, first let's describe what a self-contained script is. So a self-contained script is a script that's not a module that contains some code in its body. So in this case, we have a very simple script that takes a name and then calls this main function that passes on to this get greeting and then get greeting text, just so we have some structure and so we have something to test. And so this does a very simple job. It just prints a message to the screen. And so I can print hello PSPowerHour. I print it twice, once through write host and once through the normal output, just so we can see easier what's happening inside of the test once we run it. And so the challenge here is what happens if we want to test this. So if we want to test this, we usually .source the script. And then we can give it a name because it will ask for it anyway. And so now we imported the functions in the current scope, but we also run the main function. And that's something that we can afford in case when the function basically does nothing, like writing a message. But if it creates a user or something like that, then we cannot do that for every test. So the challenge here is to skip the call to this main function. And one way to do that is to define an alias before that, because aliases stand in front of functions in the resolve order. And so if we do this, we create a placeholder function, and then we create an alias with the same name as the entry point function. Then we can .source this script without running the main function. Instead, we will run the placeholder. And so now all the functions are in the scope, and we can just happily remove the alias and then call the main function just so we can see that it's in the scope and it would be ready to test. So this is an easy solution if you are willing to put this boilerplate code in like all your tests. But once you start thinking about, okay, I should make this a reusable function, you will kind of hit a wall, because what happens in a function is that it creates a scope. And in here we have very simple example of that. So this makes a new scope. It's just execution of a script block. And this would represent .sourcing the function directly in that scope. And so if we run this and then we try to invoke the function A, then obviously the function definition will die with the end of the scope, and we never reach this point where the function is defined in the main scope. So that's a big problem. But we can avoid this by taking this function and moving it inside of a module and then doing a little bit of magic. So here first, let's see how it looks like if we have the full function and we run it. So I just initialized everything right now. And then I will just run this import script, which comes from my module. And I will just skip the breakpoints for now. And you can see that instead of main, I'm running this placeholder function. And then I can run those tests because all of my code is now in scope. And so all the tests pass. We have this main function that we can test. We have this supporting get greeting function, and we can even mock the get greeting text function and provide a different text. So everything works, everything is great. We can ship the script in one file, and we can also test it. So the interesting stuff is happening inside of the script. So as I said, the imported functions and variables would die with the end of the scope. So what we can do is that we kind of play with the session state, and we create a new script block, and we .source it directly inside of this place by manipulating the script a bit. So if you think about it, then this would be the module, and we are maybe somewhere in like a first or second function in here, but the code that we run is running in here by the magic of .sourcing from a different scope. And so what's happening in here, I will run it one more time. if it will run. Hello? So let's restart. And okay, so I run the initialization script, I run the import function, and now I am standing in here in my module. On the parameters, the entry point is the main function and the path is the path of the script. And so I can prove that I'm inside of a module by calling execution context session state. And you can see that the module here is import script. Just deleted some code, shouldn't have done that. And then I do a trick that Pester also relies on heavily, and that's I take this script block and I take this PS commandlet session state, which represents the caller session state, so the session state from which we call this function. And I take the internal session state of this and put it directly inside of the script block through reflection. If you don't get how this code works, don't worry. What it just does is that it implements the session state from the caller scope inside of the script block and enables it to do this, to invoke in here. And so if we go further, then we dot source this script block, passing in the arguments and parameters. So we satisfy the mandatory name parameter. And then we reach here, I define a function, and now we are running in the caller scope. So I can prove that again by calling execution context session state. And here you can see that the module is empty because we are in the caller scope, which is not inside of any module. And I set the alias, and here I dot source again. So we are dot sourcing this inside of this scope, and then we take this script block, or we did that before, and we dot source it directly in here, so it will end up in here. And so if I do that, again, the placeholder is running, and here normally you would just do just the empty function, but I want to place this nice message, so I do that through invoke expression. And then because we are directly in the original scope, we need to clean up and hope that those names of the variables won't get into conflict with existing variables. There are other options to do it without variables, but this is just easy and readable. And so we clean up, remove all the variables that we used except for the ones that we imported. The script ends, and now we are back in the scope. The main function should exist. So we have that, we can test it, and we can just finish running those scripts through the self-contained script. So now you can write a script that's easy to deploy. It's in one file. It's easy to use for people who don't understand that much of a PowerShell, so they don't have to import module and know how to call a function. And you can also easily test it. So that's it for me.
Awesome. Thanks, Jakob. And so next up, we have Josh.
Awesome. Thank you. So it is right smack bang in the middle of getting kids ready for school at the moment. So you might hear kids in the background and babies crying, but they'll be good. So I'm actively working on an update for Burnt Toast at the moment. And I just got working a new feature last night that I want to quickly run through a demo of. And that is the ability to update toasts that you've already sent through to the operating system. And at the moment, this is only working with progress bars. So you can update the various data points on a progress bar. And I'll start by just showing a toast that has some default testing text up the top and a progress bar down the bottom. Status is doing stuff. The percentage done is just started. And you can see the percentage bar is really low down. Now, if I try and keep that on the screen and scroll down to the next bit, you can see this data binding hash table there, where I've got some keywords in there with some new data, and then I pass that into update BT notification. And if I run that, you'll see that the progress bar updated, it's still doing stuff, and it's about halfway done. Now, if I let that disappear, and run the last one here where my progress is up to 100%, it's done, and it's probably not doing stuff. You'll see nothing shows up on my screen. But if I open up the Action Center, all of that updated information's been updated on the toast notification itself. Now, what I glossed over initially was that hash table is also present in my initial toast that I send with submit BT notification. And also in my progress bar, you'll notice my status is progress status. And that's the same in my data binding. So basically, this can be anything as long as it matches in the data binding. And if you don't have that, it just defaults to showing what the name of that binding is with curly braces around it. Now, where this gets a little bit interesting is where you're rapidly sending updates to a toast notification. So again, I'll submit one. And then I'll quickly run through a for each loop, which is going to run that progress up to 100%. And you can see that it ends up being a pretty smooth animation for ticking up. And we get to 100%, and eventually it'll disappear. Notice in my terminal I'm getting succeeded. That's the output from the method behind update BT notification that's telling me it found the toast, it managed to update it. If the user had dismissed it, which I can do like that, and then try and update it. Maybe it would help if I actually dismissed it. There we go. Notification not found. So what I'm planning on doing when this change goes live is having the module actually issue a warning, because what this means is the user's dismissed it. There's nothing to update. So maybe, stop trying to update it. And also one more time, if I run this and chuck it into the Action Center, it's updating. You can see that there. And if I open the Action Center, it's updating in the Action Center. I can click away from it, let it finish, go back in, and now it's done. So that's a great way of keeping your toasts up to date and ready for when the user's ready to look at it. So that might not look too impressive if you haven't seen what the alternative was, which was literally replacing a toast notification. So again, I'm using my bindings and all that. I'm not bothering with the value override now. But if I run all of this, this isn't updating my toast. It's just submitting a new one. And what I ended up having to do is it submits a new one every 5 times I would have updated it with the rapid updates, because, well, I'll let you see. So what it's doing when you replace a toast is it literally rips it out of the update history and submits a brand new one. And if you're able to hear this, it plays the sound every single time it pops up as well. And just for giggles, let's have a look at what that looks like when we're seeing every single one of them. Let's turn that down a little bit. And Windows goes into a bit of a fit, and sometimes, yeah, I might stop that. I have had code crash from me doing that. So yeah, maybe not. Now, there's one more thing I've been working on, and that's in conjunction with Stevie and Tyler and Mark, and that's a module called Posh Notify. So this toast, when I run send OS notification, is going to look pretty similar to what we've been seeing. It's a toast. It's got some text on it and a default icon. But where this module gets cool is if I jump over to an Ubuntu machine and I run that same command, I get a toast in Linux. And we've got this working on Mac OS as well. So Posh Notify is a cross-platform PowerShell module you can use for toasts in your scripts, regardless of what target operating system it's going to be running on. And unfortunately, I picked the one OS, it seems, that doesn't show the image, which awesome. So that's it for the demo. If you want to play around with Burnt Toast, it's available on the gallery. So is Posh Notify. And you can hit me up on Twitter at WindowsNZ if you've got any questions. Thanks for having me.
Hey, thanks so much. I think that's the wrap on the discussion for everybody's individual talks, which means that we are towards the end of the session, and I think we're going to roll into the experimental sort of podcast discussion panel thing. So if you were watching just for the lightning talks, feel free to tune out now. Otherwise, if you'd like to hear what these very smart people have to say, stick around. Since I'm doing the mod thing, I get to be the person to ask the first question. That's how this works. And so my question for our speakers today is around the topic of pipelines. So everybody today touched on either deploying code or documentation or testing. And so I'm kind of curious to hear what your thoughts are on like the hard lessons that you've learned in the last year or two around building a pipeline that includes documentation, testing, and releasing code to end users, because it sounds like everybody here has been involved in that to some degree.
Also, don't forget, we can't unmute you for the folks that are out there.
Yep. So if I should start, or if I could start, my first lesson would be use YAML for your pipelines as much as you can instead of just setting it up in the GUI, because sooner or later you will need to have different pipelines for different branches, for example, or somebody will go to the UI, click something and break it for you, and then you just have to get it back from the history that you might or might not have, and it might or might not be easy to understand, instead of just rolling back a commit. So that was like very useful thing for me to start doing.
Well, I must admit I found it more convenient to actually manage the pipeline by the UI. The YAML just never talked to me, actually. What I did is I have the main steps all my pipelines do, like installing prerequisites, loading prerequisites, running tests. All of them have dedicated build scripts that are in source control, and all the pipeline configuration really does is run those scripts. That's just worked out better for me, but it has the same effect that the actual steps taken are, except for the publish test results and unit test results step, every single thing is basically in code in the repository. So I definitely agree with the strategic goal. Keep your pipeline steps really in the source. Well,
I've tested both, keeping the build pipelines in scripts, and also doing the at least in Azure DevOps, doing the pipelines using different tasks and configuring it either in the visual configuration and using YAML. And I haven't really landed on either of them being better than the other. I think there's good things and bad things about both approaches to the pipeline.
Okay, for me, the main difference is that you can just, your master is doing something, and then you have like a feature branch where you need to change the build, like change what you deploy. And so just in your like script or the build steps, you change it, and then it just applies to that one branch. But yeah, it can work both ways. For me, it was very useful to do it through text and through source control if like 95% of your stuff is in scripts anyway, and the steps never change, then it might work for you. If it is the different way, like for me, then that's maybe why I prefer YAML, but that's it.
On the other end of things, what I learned about the documentation part in auto-generated docs, I'm publishing all my command references to GitHub pages for my PowerHour framework project. And the thing I really learned from that is that the blood work really isn't the part you can't automate. Yes, I can automatically publish all the comment-based help or Markdown-based help, or however you prefer to maintain your help. But the real documentation pain has been in what really can only be handcrafted. Like the strategic level documentation on what your module is trying to solve or what the components in your module are trying to achieve. All these things, hard to automate based on comment-based help.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, that's a good point. You're talking about concept documentation and narrative documentation as opposed to reference documentation, right?
Yep.
Yeah. I still think you can use Markdown, like Tom was talking about earlier, to deploy that documentation, and you can run linting and link checks and all that sort of stuff in CI. You can test your documentation before you push it out, and then so you have some sort of safety around the documentation you write. But I don't think there's a good way to write that documentation. Is that what you're saying?
Oh, totally. I maintain it in Markdown and have a GitHub Pages repository which uses Jekyll to publish that Markdown as static web pages. So I already have it all in source control with linting, and I've got automatic testing for all links and things like that. I also have templates for all my documentation that will generate most of the material, the things I can automate, but the actual content in the end, hours and hours of manual labored writing Markdown files. More effort than I expected.
But so yeah, someone still needs to write the stuff that the computers can't. So, but what I've found, and for my own part, and for people on the project as well, is that when you first established some sort of documentation infrastructure, it's easier to actually keep it up to date while, at least for coding projects, that while you're writing the code and creating processes for pull request and code integration that kind of have you updated the code as a tick on a checklist when you integrate the code.
That is the very reason why I stick to comment-based help, because that's directly with the code and I can't forget it, and the tests will immediately tell me, sorry, screw up, go back and fix it.
Yeah.
But yeah, definitely exactly that problem. Otherwise, I'd never get the help done.
Mm-hmm.
So is there anything else to mine here on pipelines and how they hurt and how they work?
Oh, yeah, there is one lesson I very painfully learned, actually. That was like a head against walls and headache moment. If you're going to do tester tests in your pipeline, and please, by all heaven and gods, do, there is a nice step in Azure DevOps pipelines that allows you to publish your test results as NUnit tests. Awesome thing. Now, don't forget that one step, the checkbox that says always run even if the preceding steps fail. Nothing worse than that step being skipped because the tests failed and you want to publish the failures. I think that was like a 2 hours headache of why the hell.
Yeah, I remember being through that as well.
All right, I guess I had a question for you all. So when you're working with a build system, do you all prefer trying to get everything into the code or using the sort of like purpose-built components of that build system? Like you were just mentioning the steps in Azure DevOps, Fred.
I found that, at least for Azure DevOps, I think I prefer to use the built-in steps functionality. But for when I've used AppWeigher, for instance, I've found it easier to build the steps needed in a separate script and create your own kind of infrastructure for it using, I think, one of you guys' tools. The build helpers, for instance, is a good good tool in those cases.
Yeah, in my case, I've got a project template basically optimized for the whole thing. So I've got my entire build process scripted out. But that's among other things. I think I've got a bit of an ego problem, but I dislike the default solutions that are out there. So I've decided, Fred, if you insist on doing it the Fred way, you've got to build it the Fred way. So yeah, default module layout and default steps, and since it's everything, I can template out the entire project layout, including the build actions as part of the templating system in file-based. Making it as build scripts is just a more efficient way to go. So yeah, no matter the build system, I go with the script approach. Amongst other things, it has the benefit of being almost universal, because it does not matter what automation engine you use. You can use the same template, just add a few parameters for things like what's the build folder, because that way I don't have to do like a if else thing. I could use the build helpers for that, guys, out there, in case you're not yet stuck on a template. I think they have got a that's a pretty good command for in order to get the actual build folder in as many of the well-known platforms as possible. So that would help you stay agnostic without having to parameterize things. I work with parameters for that. And no matter whether it's a GitLab server at a customer or whether it's a Where, is it Azure DevOps or another solution, I just add the files and can get rocking. The only thing, sometimes I have to give up on nice test dashboards because the unit test results publishing step is not universally available.
So for me, it depends really much on the tooling for the thing I'm building. So for example, writing a manual command for building like old .NET framework solution through MS Build with all the publishing TRXs and all of that, that's really difficult. And on the other hand, you can just click 2 buttons and just tell it, yeah, build old solutions in this folder, and it generates command that's like this long that you can then copy, maybe if you prefer. But if you do it like with the .NET Core, you just say .NET build, and that's it. And if you have a tool like that that helps you like manage what you are trying to do, then I do it through the script. But if I don't have a tool like that, I rely on the pre-built solutions because they are usually much easier to set up because pretty much everybody is building it the same way. So I just give it the names and the folders that I want it to do the same work in.
All right, about that C# stuff, I click build on Visual Studio before I commit it as DLL. I'm lazy that way. For some reason, nobody touches my DLL, my C# source code. I don't know why. So I never had to deal with file conflicts on the DLL file. So that was the path of least resistance. By the way, I'm very open to pull requests. I'd be happy to fix that issue if there's anybody that's brave enough.
I feel strongly about it, but not strongly enough to write C# code. So I kind of want to check in because I think everybody here is responsible for managing modules internally or publicly, right? You know, you've either got open source stuff or you've got inner source stuff that you kind of maintain. So what have been some of the hard lessons that you've learned around that? Like what makes for good management of a project that other people depend on to make their stuff work?
Yeah, maybe. And you need to be responsive because it's difficult to do maintenance if you like have pull requests open for 2 years like I have. So that's what I'm trying to make better right now. but yeah, that
Yeah,
would be
I'd
it.
agree with that too. I have too many projects out there with like tons of open issues and open pull requests. I think like having another person partner with you on a module would probably be helpful. That way, like if you get stuck doing stuff, ideally, like you can be more responsive to folks. Not that I've done that yet, but I don't know. That's just a potential idea.
Yeah, so I want to pile on that point because every single project I have where I do like solo work or whatever inevitably begins to fall apart, and the only reason that PowerHour is continually functional is because Warren's been around when I was drunk on D&D for a while and forgot to do anything useful. So, like code projects are very much the same way, right? Like you're going to have shifting responsibilities and availability. Especially for the stuff that you're not maintaining like as part of your day job.
Also,
Absolutely.
working with a lot of people that aren't really that used to the whole. For me, being an IT pro or an IT operations guy, working with a lot of people that aren't really very used to the whole code maintenance. Git side of things, having good, even on internal modules, having good contribution documentation has really helped. And dumbing it, or not dumbing it down, but rewriting fairly detailed instructions on how to actually do the contribution, it has helped immensely.
That's a good point. I don't have that covered yet. Might have to steal somebody's approach document docs to that. I mean, they should be fairly universal. The other thing that's been a main pain point for me when I've seen other people's projects is having a clear project layout where a newcomer can actually figure out where stuff is and doesn't feel thrown into a labyrinth of messy code. Just for example, the original PowerShell get module with, I think it was like 25,000 lines of code in a single file. No way in hell I'm going to contribute to that.
Yeah, this is difficult because for this to work, you need a pile of newcomers that tell you what's wrong. Because once they get acquainted with the code, they start looking at it and they start knowing it. And so you just need to process it through more and more people who don't know what it is about. And that's sometimes difficult.
Agreed. That developer tunnel vision hits all of us.
There was a question how we handle collaboration. If you want to go on, then go on, please.
No, okay. For a clear layout, like one function per file and clear folder names that very expressively lead you to what resource you want. And as Jakob already said, get a second perspective. Somebody who hasn't been involved with the project, just to see how an outsider sees things. I think this is part of the problem why, for some reason, nobody wants to contribute to my C# mess. While the function layout actually works out mostly. I get a few takers there, but yeah. Second set of opinion, somebody who hasn't been involved is a real safer on that.
Jakob, you wanted to talk about collaboration?
There was a question in the YouTube channel. How do we handle collaboration if through Slack, Gitter, or just through GitHub? For me, it's all of those. But I mainly try to do it through GitHub because then I can see it there, and if I go back to the issue after a while, then I can see the history and I can discuss it publicly, and other people can see the history and collaborate on that as well. Unlike if I do it in Slack, it's gone in a few days, or it's in a private chat, and then I have to repeat it.
That's a good point. That's one of the things that I've had some discussions about before, is that the closer the documentation lives to the work item, the better off you are. And functionally, those conversations, the bug reports, the questions about how things work, all of that is a form of documentation that we don't really think very much about, but is critically important to future maintainers and to current maintainers who weren't involved directly in that thing, right? Like the answer, go spelunking through the Git commits to figure out what happened and why, is not a great one, particularly if you're missing all that surrounding context where somebody does a bug report and then you say, okay, well, what system are you using? And they clarify all that, and you say, try this, and they try it, and it still doesn't work, and all that gives you the details to understand what happened. But if all that happened in Slack or something, it's gone. But you're also right that you have to meet people who are making those reports wherever they're making them, right? Like you can't just throw away the data because it's not in the place you want it, even though GitHub, I think, is the best place for most of us.
Oh, and while we're at it, I know that for quite a few of my questions that I had, it was extremely helpful because those issues are also part of the Google search results. So if I'm looking for something, well, I might even stumble over the issue and figure out what's the source. I might understand there's not a fix right now. I might find a workaround, a solution for it. It has saved me tons of time being able to do that, and it's like that's gone.
Yeah, I mean, that's very, very useful point that you can see the team discussing with the people, telling them like this is the plan, and you can see if it has been or hasn't been fixed yet. So yeah, that saves a lot of time that you know that this is just not possible right now. And I also feel the pain of not being able to retrieve the history from time to time where I know that there's an issue in my GitHub. I just cannot find it. I just cannot come up with the correct keywords to find it. And I know there is like a perfect answer to your question, but I just can't find the issue.
I occasionally have better luck looking those up, not through GitHub, but through Google, because Google indexes so much of GitHub and their search algorithms better. And so like sometimes I'll be like, I know that there's an issue about this and I don't have any idea what it was or how it fit together, but like here's some search terms, and then I'll just make sure that it's searching GitHub for this repository, and like inevitably it'll turn the thing up and I'll be like, oh, well, there it is, and then send that along. I've had really bad luck searching through GitHub's UI though.
Okay, I will try that.
What else can I stir up that y'all might have strong opinions on? Who signs their scripts? This came up in the community recently. I noticed not a lot of the modules are signed.
Thank you, Jakob, for doing that.
Yeah, I do it because I have to.
Yeah, Chrissy badgered you long enough to make it happen.
Kind of. Something like that.
Yeah, my work will soon also be code signed, my private open source code, like the PS framework. But otherwise, it's been a pain getting a code signing certificate, and it's been lots of. I've always procrastinated successfully yet. Not much longer anymore. Internally, I do a lot of code signing because I'm security PFE, and well, when I work for customers, they kind of ask me about how can they limit what code is allowed to execute and whatnot, and that tends to lead towards a code signing pipeline that means that all the administrative scripts get signed. So yeah, lots of internal work is code signed.
Yeah, for me too. If the customer environment demands code signing, then it'll be done. If not, then probably not.
Well, I was hoping that would be more contentious than it ended up being, but that's fine, I guess. Everybody's in agreement. Sign your scripts. Fine.
If you have to.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, it's not difficult. It's just like a lot of infrastructure and a lot of keeping sure that your key doesn't leak and so on. And then the people like who runs the all signed policy on their computers. Pretty much nobody. I don't know how it's in enterprise, but I never had that set up, and so on. And so it's just, for me, it's just the barrier of the exception that's in PowerShell get. That's why I sign it. Otherwise, I wouldn't do it.
Yeah, there's a question in the YouTube chat around whether or not the cost to get a signing cert is the barrier for a lot of open source projects. And I know for mine, it certainly was. I only had
Agreed.
one active project at the time, though, and I was like, does it make sense to buy this for one project? Do I care?
Yeah, the barrier, that was definitely the barrier for me, but as an MVP and now as a Microsoft employee, that's no longer a factor.
Yeah.
We get one for free.
Yeah, and even if you have the money, isn't there like a pretty complex, like you have to do paperwork and all that stuff to have them actually trust you?
Yeah, it takes a lot of time. But yeah, it would be really nice if there was like a service like Let's Encrypt, but for code.
Yeah.
I was going to literally say that. It'd be really nice to apply your like open source project to something like Let's Encrypt, right? And then have them look at it and then decide whether or not that thing could be signed. That'd be a good third-party service.
That's not gonna happen.
Oh,
Think
no,
about
yeah,
the
for sure not.
about the expertise that a service would need in order to ensure it actually means something. That which leads us back to one point about the entire code signing thing, is that it would be, as far as I can see, totally legit to go self-signed. In the end, in order for that code to be considered trusted by publisher rules, you need to import the publisher certificate anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So the identity assurance part from the code signing certificate, code signing from a certificate authority is a nice to have. But once you've done initial trust verification once that yes, this is actually the publisher of that code, that extra benefit doesn't really apply. After that, it's just a technical solution to ensure it still comes from that person. If the signer is compromised, the private key is gone anyway. No matter whether it's a trusted certificate or a private certificate, it doesn't really matter. So going with a self-signed code signing certificate would actually be legit, in my opinion, for most open source requirements.
But then everybody would have to install our certificate route.
They would have to do that anyway. That's the whole point.
Why? That's why we have the certificate authorities.
If I want to apply rules to that,
okay, yeah,
not necessarily.
I was just talking about the current PKI model and how it works with the certification authority. There you just say, I published it, I did that, that's my code, and that's it.
The thing is, the code signing, going to a public CA publisher means only that yes, they verified that you're Jakub Yaris, as far as they can determine based on the questions you ask you, which I know is a comprehensive thing that takes a little bit of time, more than just a little bit. So there is enough effort in there to validate the person. However, there is really no guarantee that the person that receives the certificate and signs his code with that maintains proper security of his client, of his automation platform, of his credentials. So at the end of the day, it only is a guarantee that it went through your desktop, unless you published your certificate to your automation platform, in which case it only skips the trust required for the gallery. There is no inherent protection against compromise on that.
Yeah, I wasn't saying that. I was just saying that it's signed by my certificate. So having self-signed would just replicate the same issue, but with the added overhead of installing my certificate all the time. And then there would be like the issue of me getting the certificate to you without man-in-the-middle attack, and you validating that it's actually me, and so on. So That's why we have the whole infrastructure in place, even with all its flaws and like not providing you those guarantees that you want.
PowerShell probably shouldn't be used as a security barrier.
Yeah.
As a security barrier anyway. So in at least in an enterprise, you'd probably be better off trying to limit the users from running the things that they might type into PowerShell, rather than limiting who can write scripts that can run in the shell.
I did not technically understand it. I think I've got lag here right now. I'd just like to finish something towards regarding the point about Jakob and the code signing authority, just to be sure, because it's left at a bad position. I agree that getting of official code signing as code signing cert from an official authority is better than doing a self-signed. I'm just saying that going with a self-signed certificate is better than going unsigned. So if you're not a person that receives it for free, that does not have the time and effort to spend on getting a code signing certificate for an open source project you're doing on your spare time, going self-signed is, in my opinion, better than unsigned. And you can do self-signed code signing with very little effort.
And someone just in YouTube chat mentioned, Wolfgang Wagner mentioned that they actually download the public modules and sign them internally, which is probably a good practice as well. Probably shouldn't be relying on the public gallery. You should pull to your own gallery and ideally sign if you need that.
Yeah, that's a good point too.
Oh, totally. Resigning modules for internal use with internal certificates is a must. Otherwise, it's not enough trust. Otherwise, in my opinion.
Well, I managed to stir up a really contentious topic towards like the end of the hour, for which I feel pretty good about. But we are closing in on time to wrap. So if there's closing thoughts.
No.
Fred, Tom, any closing thoughts? Pipelines, signing.
Oh, totally. Whatever you're doing with your PowerShell code, automate as much as you can. Build a pipeline, even if it's a crappy one. It doesn't matter. You can improve it later on. Go with code signing if you can make it happen. Go for Kirby self-signed if that's all you can get your hands on right now. The thing is, if you're doing manual labor, if you're doing it the manual way, you're doing it wrong. Doesn't matter how little it actually is. If you're doing it manually, you're doing it wrong.
Tom, you're the last voice.
Yeah, no, I have nothing more.
Okay, well then I guess the wrap here is thanks everybody so much for coming out today, for sharing both your expertise and your knowledge and your demonstrations with us. It's super duper appreciated. We're going to do this again the same time slot next month. Warren, did you want to talk about our next PS Power Hour?
So we have one more coming up next week on Monday. I think we have like 3 slotted. So if anyone is interested in doing demos next week, that would be awesome. I'm assuming you 3 are probably good for a while, but yeah.
Yeah, and that'll be at 6 p.m. Pacific, correct?
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. So that'll be for the US-based folks to get off after work. We're trying to avoid making everybody who's presenting right now from presenting at 2 o'clock in the morning anymore, because that's not a really good experience for them and pretty unfair. Yeah. All right. Well, we've pitched you to come out and talk again in the future. We're super excited for that, and we will see you all in about a week.
Yep.
Cheers.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.